Andras here. When I'm not co-hosting The World is Wrong podcast, I'm hosting and producing the Radio 8-Ball podcast, where we answer questions by picking songs at random, like picking musical tarot cards. We've hosted musical divinations for people like John C. Reilly, Patricia Arquette, Tig Notaro, and Fred Armisen, and hosted over 200 songwriters, providing the randomly chosen answers from Inara George and Dan Byrne to Mose Allison and Alan Toussaint. That's Radio 8-Ball, all one word. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts and download our app from the iTunes App Store.
I'm Larry Bishop, and you're listening to The World is Wrong podcast.
We're here to tell you how the world is wrong. The world is wrong about fur.
An imaginary portrait of Diane Arbus. Acting!
Welcome to The World is Wrong, an extremely positive podcast where we celebrate films the world is wrong about. I am one of your hosts, and my name is Andras Jones.
And I'm Brian Connolly, and also the host.
We are your hosts this month in Kidmania. We are suffering. You've heard of Listomania, probably. Once it ravaged Europe, but now Kidmania is the problem. It's not even a problem. You find yourself in a state of silent expectation and euphoria.
Oh man. I'm going to blow your mind, but I actually was going to mention Listomania while we talked about this episode. So it's good you already brought it up. I'll bring it up later.
Oh, yes. Check it out, folks. It's Ken Russell, Roger Daltrey teaming up again after Tommy to take on Franz Liszt. Whoo, boy. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the second of the 4 films we are exploring in this month of Kidman appreciation. It is Fur, an imaginary portrait of Diane Arbus, directed by Steve Shainberg, starring Nicole Kidman and Mr. Robert Downey Jr. Anything you want to say about it before I dive into my explanation of it, Brian?
No, just that this movie was not at all what I thought it was going to be, and I think maybe people who haven't seen it maybe will come in with the same misexpectations of it. So I think it's exciting to tell people what this movie's actually like.
Yes, and we are very lucky. We are going to cut, in the middle of this podcast, we are going to cut to an interview that I did with the director, Steve Shainberg, and we'll talk later about how that all came about. But now I'm going to play a clip from the film, and then I'll tell you about it.
Turn around. Don't look at me. Turn around. Take off your camera. Just put it on the table. Please close your eyes now.
I only want to take your portrait.
Dear, please close your eyes. Step back from the window. Her eyes closed.
Yes.
Don't turn around. Keep your eyes closed. Please disrobe.
What?
You can keep your undergarments on if you like. The bath is getting cold.
In Fur, an imaginary portrait of Diane Arbus, Nicole Kidman plays Diane Arbus before she became the Diane Arbus history remembers for her intimate photos of, quote, freaks and nudists and other societal outcasts. The film imagines Arbus as a late 1950s housewife and mother working as her husband Alan's assistant on commercial shoots in their apartment in New York City. At first, Fur has a proto-Mad Men energy with an exceptionally talented woman in cool 50s fashion stuck behind a fairly average man, but the film quickly shifts into the fairy tale transgressiveness that made director Steven Shainberg's Secretary such a beguiling, outside-of-the-box hit. Kidman's Arbus finds herself drawn, camera in hand, to her upstairs neighbor's apartment, where Lionel Sweeney, soulfully played by a pre-Iron Man Robert Downey Jr., seductively initiates the imagined Deanne into the world she would go on to document as an artist. Lionel is a hirsute man. He has hypertrichosis, which means he is covered in hair from top to toe. Lionel has made his living as a circus oddity and as a wig maker. And in his world, Deanne comes alive as an artist, where the Arbus home is sterile, Lionel's is ramshackle, where her life is domestic, his is strange. She has kids and a husband. He has a circus full of wild friends who eventually and quite literally come spilling out of the ceiling when Kidman's Arbus seeks to merge her worlds. And all of this might seem like it's a zany premise, but the feeling driven by Kidman's performance is one of hesitant, curious, silent rebellion and awakening. And it is an imagined portrait, so it might not be a true story with a capital T, but it does work as an invitation to the world of Diane Arbus, the artist, as she is becoming who she becomes at the end of the movie. So it's a great invitation into her world. And I loved it, and I absolutely loved it. I'm very much looking forward to talking about it with you, Brian.
Yeah. No, it's so I guess, how is the world wrong about this movie?
Well, a few things. First of all, as I say in my interview with Steven, I feel like it's a culmination of something he was working on as a director through Secretary. And it's always odd when someone gives you the best possible follow-up to the film that was a hit, and then people reject it. That's sort of what I feel about this film. I feel like there's something about the film is about the way society rejects outsiders and weirdos and, quote, again, freaks. It's a word that Diane Arbus used to describe some of the people that she photographed and lived with. And I guess it's a loving and antiquated term. But it does express something about the aesthetic. And I guess not just the aesthetic of like what she's celebrating, but that the response of this, the people treat this film like it's The Elephant Man or Lionel Sweeney or like when the way people talk about it, it's like mean kids taunting a person who just is different and weird. And like this film is different and weird. And what Steve Shainberg likes to make movies about is people who are different and weird. And the sort of glee and joy, as we got into it with the Jack and Jill thing, I guess it's probably one of my things, is when I feel like a movie is trying to talk about something interesting and intimate, and then the culture wants to kick it and make fun of it for sort of like the easiest to pick out traits. Like, oh, he's covered. Who cares about Robert Downey Jr. covered in hair? Make some joke about some. It's like you're exactly the kind of person that this movie is trying to defend. People like this, people like us, people who even feel like that from or criticize it in that way. And so there's a meanness in the way. So there's one, the response that it elicits a lot of times is this weird, ignorant meanness that's triggering for me. And then the other is just that I don't know what more you want from Steve Shainberg. if you liked Secretary. And a lot of people went from liking it to not liking it. We can talk about that. But it's just so much the next and better version of that thing, in the same way that, like, I don't know, like Unbreakable is better than The Sixth Sense, and everyone knows it. Like, Fur is better than Secretary, but nobody knows it. So that's like a few of the, that's my minimal rant on how the world is wrong about this film.
Great.
But also, it's very close to me. We're going to talk about it, but I acted in Steven's college, his student film, a big budget student film, that basically I followed his trajectory. And so I'm not just defending him as a fan of the film, but I guess I'm defending him as a peer. And believe me, we'll get into it. I have some criticisms too. I'm not like, it's not just blind fawning loyalty. I appreciate him because he's really good. So what did you think, Brian?
I thought it was interesting because I went in reluctantly, expecting like, oh, I don't want to see some docudrama, biopic about a photographer. That sounds so boring. Like, that's not a movie that I have any interest in watching at all. And I guess I just should have expected it to be what it was, which is like a more, almost like a fantasy, like a weird kind of dream reality film about this person, much like the tone of Secretary, or The Prom, which I watched before this. And so I was totally surprised and taken off, completely, I couldn't believe, like, once Robert Downey Jr. shows up looking like a Sasquatch, I was like, oh, I had no idea what this movie's this way. I think the poster lied, because the poster for the movie has a completely clean shaven, handsome looking, like Robert Downey Jr. kissing Nicole Kidman. So I just never watched this movie being like, I don't want to watch that movie. But I'm glad that it kind of lied, because then it was like a true surprise. I was totally surprised that that's what this movie was, in a good way. Like, and it just really, I like movies that have this kind of like dream reality symbolism. Like, and it's very interesting when someone does it as a biography about a real person. And that's sort of why I wanted to bring up Listomania, because I feel like Ken Russell in the 70s with his biographies he did of all the different composers is very much like this movie, in that it's like he's not interested in telling just a real version of this person's life. It's more like symbolic. It's more like a painting. It's more about like the feeling and themes and the things that made this artist. And that's a more interesting movie than just sort of like just a straightforward, like you see like with about most, musician, movies where it's like they were born and they got into this and then they met this person and then this happened. Like, it's so much more interesting to do it the way that Fur does it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's I think it's also, well, I know this about Steven, that he is hugely influenced by Diane Arbus. So it's almost like this sort of reverent fan fiction bio, where he's focusing on a 3-month period where Diane Arbus wakes up to her own artistry and leaves her husband and her kids to go off and begin what becomes this revolutionary career as a photographer. And obviously, since this happens in 1958, there's also this sense of Diane Arbus's awakening is also a metaphor for a lot of women's awakening. That's why I mentioned Mad Men in my intro. Like, at the beginning, it feels like this, but then she goes on, like you'd say, said a much weirder trip, because Diane Arbus went on a much weirder trip. It's not because the director is insisting, no offense to Ken Russell, but it's not like the director is insisting on dragging someone into his wild and weird trip. This is a sense of like, I don't know, there's a kind of perfection to it, because when you now reverse engineer it, you can see that Steven was trying to make this film several times before, And in both times, you could look at those both as like little Diane Arbus side stories in terms of what they're exploring and the way he explores them. So there's just kind of a perfection of like the right person got the gig. You know, someone who's really into comic books and like, I guess maybe like Jon Favreau and The Mandalorian. Like there's a sense with that, like he is really that nerd and he has lived his life. Like he is the right guy for that job. Yeah. And like, but at the same time, everyone wants to do Star Wars. So, you know, there's probably a lot of people who are the right guy for that job. Whereas there's something so particular and specific about this director's relationship to this artist, where it feels like it's almost like what he's doing would be taking liberties if somebody else did it. You know, that sort of idea of like, okay, well, we're not going to really tell your story. We're going to take some facts from your story, put them all into 1 month, shake it all up, and it'll be a nice little, you know, Diane Arbus milkshake. And I could, so there's like this playing with fire quality to doing that. Like you should only really do that if you have that innate sense of like, I may not know Diane Arbus, but I know Diane Arbus's work and I know what it feels like. And I know what it's like to hang out with other people who are as moved as I am by that. And I know what we resonate with. And I've spent years thinking about this and talking about this. And then he gets this opportunity to make this film. And then the cast, let's talk about Nicole Kidman as Diane Arbus, huh?
Man, she's great. It's like, I think even the people that didn't like this movie or didn't, you know, that were kind of thrown by it, you can't argue that she's brilliant in this movie. You know, like she's really, really good. I mean, she's good in everything, which is why we're doing a Kidmania month. But it's like the way she can just disappear in a role, like within a minute, I'm not thinking that it's Nicole Kidman. I'm just like, this is Diane Arbus, even though Nicole Kidman looks nothing like Diane Arbus if you actually look up what she looks like. But it doesn't matter because she can just embody the persona, and she just does it so well. Yeah.
This film feels so good. When I rewatched it, but then I rewatched it again last night, and it really is a film that benefits from the second watch, because when you're not worried about, there's not like suspense to it, but there's a little bit of suspense to it the first time you watch it, of like what's going to happen and is this going to go bad with the family, because she's basically she begins an artistic affair with her upstairs neighbor, played by Robert Downey Jr., that becomes an emotional affair, that becomes a physical affair.
Yeah. And
there's, in movies like that, there's always this feeling of like, oh, what's going to happen? Are the lovers going to get caught? Is there going to be jealousy and broken hearts? And that's there. But once the suspense around that is gone and you get to really experience it as the fairy tale that it is, it's I just love it. I love the world that Downey's character inhabits. I love when she goes up there. I love that there's a great scene where, like I mentioned in the intro, where she finds a door, like an attic door in her apartment, and opens it up and brings it down, and then all of these circus people start coming out of the ceiling and into her white 1950s world. And I just loved that. I loved that scene so much. Were there any standouts for you?
For the scenes?
Yeah, just like
I really like the part where they both get into that bath together.
Yeah.
Where Robert Downey Jr. and Nicole Kidman are just like, it's just like there's this part where, again, like I've only seen this movie once, so you get a little nervous being like, is he gonna do something bad to her? Is this gonna be like a creepy thing? You know, because their relationship starts out with him kind of asking these sort of inappropriate sexual questions or these uncomfortable, you know, personal questions. And then it goes into, okay, now we're going to take a bath together. But there's something about that room where this bath is, it adds to this dream quality of like, why would there be this kind of big, long pool, hot tub type thing in this like third floor apartment in New York? It doesn't quite make sense, but it makes sense as much as anything does in this movie, where it just feels sort of like a dream logic, where it's like, of course they're going to open a door and walk into a room where there's this weird large bath. And then
Very
just her
large,
kind of,
almost like a bathhouse.
Very
kind of tub.
large. Yeah. And just the fact that it's like her character here seems so vulnerable and kind of like this is a foreign world to her. This is still very new to her, this sort of like outside the norm world that she's going to embrace as an artist. And so just like her getting into this tub with this, Sasquatchy looking guy, I thought that scene was really good. And I think once that part happened, I was like, oh, okay, I think I kind of know what this movie's... Now this is I was totally wrong what this movie was. I love that part. And I really like the part where she's kind of hanging out with all these circus people or quote-unquote freaks or whatever. And I forget the actor's name, but the little person who was in Seinfeld as Kramer's friend sings this really great song. And just watching him sing... That part was so good. Like that part is really I found that part to be very emotional and very I just really liked that. And he has a pretty good voice. I don't think I've ever seen an actor sing in anything ever, but he sells it in that part. And the bookends of the movie in the nudist colony, maybe because I really enjoy nudist colonies in movies and it's rare to see it. I really like those scenes, and there's something about those scenes, the way it's lit and the way it's acted, that for whatever reason reminds me of the movie The Master, and I don't know why. Maybe because there's that part where he thinks he sees all those naked people in The Master, but there's something about those scenes and the way it's framed and the kind of the light, the blue, and sort of like the way the people look like real people. Like these aren't the people you normally see naked in a movie. And this is like the first minute of the movie. You're looking at this guy's balls, basically, truthfully. And that's a shocking beginning, but I loved it. It's like, okay, this movie's just going to just dunk you right in immediately into something uncomfortable and different.
Yeah.
And also, why would nudists have wicker chairs? That's got to be the most uncomfortable chair to sit in naked. And they're sitting in these wicker chairs, and you can tell it's uncomfortable because when they stand, both the woman and guy's butts are just bright red from the uncomfortable wicker. Like, that is not a good nudist colony chair.
You want to talk about uncomfortable? I listened to the director's commentary on this, and they had to have all of the actors that auditioned for these roles come in and take off their clothes and sit there and talk because that's the only way to audition someone for that part, because one, you want to see how they, like, what their bodies look like, because they're going to be nude, and you also want to see how comfortable they can be. Could they sit there and seem like nudists? Could you?
Yeah, I could do that.
I couldn't.
Really? But you're an actor, and I just saw a movie for this episode where you're practically naked in it.
Practically.
Pretty much, definitely.
it's viva la difference. It's just the little bits that. Anyway, who said little? Anyway, so what was it? There was something else I was going to say about. It's funny that you mentioned The Master because I watched Steve's. I just finished, even just like this morning, watching Steve's second film, or his first film after The Prom, which was Hit Me. And it was made, I think, the year of Hard Eight. And it has Philip Baker Hall and William H. Macy in it. And so I've been thinking about Steve and his career in terms of Paul Thomas Anderson, because they basically, they've had very different careers, but they've been along a similar trajectory in terms of their first film to now. So I thought that's an interesting connection. I actually kind of want to, because I want to be able to talk about the interview. Let's go to that. But before we do we've been mentioning The Prom. We're not talking about the new musical with Nicole Kidman, which I also watched for this and spoke about in the intro episode that we did for, it's covering all of Kidman's stuff. But you watched The Prom, and I asked you, could you talk about it? Because since I'm in it, it's impossible for me to talk about it.
Yeah. Do you want me to do it now or after the interview?
No, you should do it before because we're going to talk about it in the interview.
Okay.
And then people will. Steve and I don't explain it. So.
All right. So yeah, because I have questions about it. I'll save those till after the interview. But let me just kind of lay the plot out quickly. It's lucky because the movie's under an hour, so it's an easy plot. Not emotionally, but story wise. So the great Andras Jones plays Marty, and. He's an odd high school kid because post-gym, he bathes in the janitor's closet. And you're like, okay, this is interesting. Why? What is he just embarrassed to be? Because like I was that way in high school. I didn't bathe in the janitor's closet. I just didn't bathe at all because I was too nervous to be around other men naked in high school. But we find out that he has a weird problem with his body where there's these, I would say they're kind of like birthmarks, but they appeared long after he was born. They just kind of showed up on his body one day. And they're kind of like these weird sort of, like they almost look like scar. How would you describe it? They almost look like spots on an animal, basically.
Or like that scarlet thing that different people get on their skin. Yeah.
Just dark brown splotches all over, like not on his face. You really only can see it once he takes the shirt off. So it's all over his body at that point. And he... one lonely afternoon decides to go into a peep show to, because why not? And to see, to visit, see a stripper in one of those private rooms, kind of like in Paris, Texas, those little rooms where you sit in and you can see the lady through a window and you put, quarters in a slot. So he goes into a room called the Prom. And once he puts the quarter in, the window opens and there's Jennifer Jason-Leigh, sort of kind of dressed up, sort of like a teenage girl, kind of in a fetish sort of way. And this relationship kind of forms between this exotic dancer and this kid and this awkward kid. And and there's these great scenes of like constantly putting the quarters in because she's like, come on, let's keep talking because the thing will close like right at some moment where it seems like some vulnerability will be shown or an emotional connection, and he has to keep putting the money in to open it up. And over days and days of kind of coming back and talking to this lady through this peep show scenario, an emotional connection forms. And Marty ends up kind of waiting in the back alley outside the the peep show place, and is like, oh, can I walk you home, or can we go get something to eat? And basically a nice little connection forms between these people, much like between the two characters in Secretary and much like in Fur. And basically he warms up to eventually showing her his body that he's been so ashamed of, so scared of showing people. And sort of like both of them have this great sort of understanding of one another and don't really care about each other's physical problems or her situation in life with what her job is. And it's just sort of, it turns into this actually sort of sweet, nice little story between these two people, a nice little connection that I think Steven Shainberg is so good at doing. Is that it? What did I leave out for story?
Oh, nothing.
I think I did. Just pretty good, right?
Along the way, we get to hang out with Cole Hauser and J.T. Walsh and Natalia Nagulich.
Yes.
From Walsh and Nagulich, particularly from The World of Mammoth. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we go to the interview with Steve Shainberg? In fact, I'll play a clip from the Prom before, and then we'll go to that, and then we'll come back and we'll keep talking about this movie.
Hey, are you a virgin? Virgins make me horny.
Turn around. Turn around. I'm paying, aren't I?
Yeah. It's your time.
Keep your clothes on.
Well, that's kinky.
Just dance like a regular person. Like somebody at a prom. A girl.
Don't you think I'm a girl?
Close your eyes. Are they closed?
Yeah, they're close.
Okay, turn around. Come closer. Keep your eyes closed, don't open them.
I won't.
You want to go to the prom with me?
What do you want me to say?
Say yes.
Yes, I'd love to. The real prom?
No, just this one, I guess.
Ready to do this?
Yeah, that's it. Sure.
Okay, so I think we have to start off with the prom. If you and I are going to talk about Fur, an imaginary portrait of Diane Arbus, we have to start with the prom, and not just because it's how we know each other, but because I feel like Fur is the culmination of something you started when you were at AFI and working on the prom. And so I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about that and how the prom connects to Fur.
Well, I mean, I think you're, first of all, dead on right about that connection. And, you know, I grew up with Diane Arbus's photographs on my childhood walls because my uncle, who's a writer, was very close to Deanne. And my dad was Diane Arbus's daughter's psychiatrist. So sometimes my dad would get paid by Deanne just giving him photographs. And my uncle was really, really close to her and was part of a sort of artistic group of people that in New York at the time were very close. So her images of the sort of Mexican dwarf and transvestites and so forth were in my childhood home. And I was completely taken with them. And I knew I had never met her, but I always was hearing about her and where she was going and what she was doing. So I had, from a very young age, a kind of disposition toward unusual people. And both of my parents were psychiatrists. And so the dinner conversation was always about their patients.
Yeah.
And my sister and I would sit there and we would listen to them. And I think that these influences always made me sympathetic to and compassionate toward, and also wanting to sort of understand the position of the true outsider, the really unusual being, whether physically or psychologically. So, you know, and just as an aside, that continues today in a couple of projects that I'm trying to get made, with, to some extent, you know, there's the straight line from the prom to Diane Arbus and the characters that she was trying to photograph and connect to, all the way up to today when I'm still trying to make those kinds of movies. And, you know, it's just sort of like a fundamental built-in point of view on who I'm looking at and how I'm looking at them, even if they're an ordinary person. Like right now I'm working on a movie with Juliette Binoche and Alessandro Nivola, who's a very great New York actor. And Nivola is playing an ex-cop, but he's an absolute mess. And he's incredibly conflicted, and he's got a lot of troubles. And that's what draws me to that character. So it's always something inside that is boiling and you know, that the character is ruminating on and struggling with. And, you know, that certainly for Arbus Arbus's character in Fur, she was struggling with the rest of her life and what path to take and how to be in touch with and how to act upon what her most pressing curiosity was. And I just don't think that there's anything more vital that somebody can be working with, either in real life or in a movie. That's the struggle. So that's a short version of an answer.
Yeah. Well, when I think of The Prom and I think of Secretary and I think of Fur, I think of the three as really being a trio of films about two individuals exposing themselves to each other in a very and it's one of those things where that sounds sort of prurient and transgressive, but the way it's handled in your films is very slow and thoughtful and earnest. It takes these things that could seem transgressive and strange, and treats them very tenderly. And I just feel like are you saying that that's a theme that you're exploring in the next things?
Well, I mean, I think the way you describe it is, as I experience getting close to somebody else, or as I experience, the way it feels to, expose oneself, and that's, in the realest sense, not just in like you take your clothes off. It's you take your clothes off in every conceivable way. That exposure is a frightful and exciting and dangerous territory, for people. And I think for me that idea of it, that experience of it, is something beautiful and something moving. And I think it's a struggle for everybody. And so I think my perspective on it is, in that sense, kind of it is unusual in the sense that, like, I'm pointing at something which doesn't get a lot of attention, but is at the center of living. And it's not like intentional on my part. It's just how I am. It's just I don't know. It's like, and in a way, when if people come to me with projects that don't have that element, I just don't get interested. So on the one hand, I think I'm like relatively narrow in terms of how I respond to making something, because I'm in a way always looking for a similar feeling that's, for whatever reason, is important to me.
Well, that definitely comes through. There's this really beautiful consistency. And I was thinking, going back and watching these, it's just one of those things where I guess I'm like you in that way. Like, I'm looking at this and thinking, I'm so much more interested in this world. Like, if you were this obsessed with gangsters, you would have made 12 films by now.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's incredibly difficult. It's like I have, 10 scripts sitting on my desk. I'm looking right at them now. And I can't get them made. I can't get them made. And they're all, I mean, if I, they take place in different time periods. They are, some of them are cheap, some of them are expensive, but they all deal with a emotional question. They deal with a complex way in which, someone emerges from some kind of inner prison to discover something bigger in life, in one way or another. And the very fact that they take place primarily in an emotional landscape makes them fringe movies. It makes them movies which defy both the financier and probably ultimately the audience expectation for something else from a movie. It's like I went to a film festival once, and this was in regard to the first feature I ever made from this Jim Thompson movie. And the buyer at the festival, I'll never forget, she said, the ending of your movie is so sad. Why does it have to be so sad? And I said, well, you're here at the festival. You can purchase a lot of movies that have happy endings, but this one doesn't. So there's very little opening for something else,
Yeah.
It's
Well, this is where this, I guess, leads us to probably the most difficult question I have to ask.
Yeah.
So our podcast is called The World is Wrong. And basically the goal is to challenge the way the world can be wrong about films. And there's something about, like, we're getting to that, but there's something particularly about, like, Fur, and I think Secretary also, that led up to Fur, that makes your films kind of like the characters you make your films about. They're kind of freaks. That are easy to bully and pick on if you're not a very sensitive or thoughtful person. And I wanted to share a quick little anecdote that maybe illustrates what I want to get to.
Sure.
So when Secretary came out, I was married, and my wife and all of her radical feminist, sex-positive friends just glommed onto this movie, and they loved it. I mean, the same people who had The Ethical Slut on their bookshelf, or Mists of Avalon, or were really into Peach's first record. And I fully dug Secretary, but I also felt from these women in my life that there was something they were getting out of it that I understood about as well as Alan Arbus understands Deanne in Fur. And I just think it's so interesting that, and particularly I'm so curious about what the experience is like for you, that 20 years later, that same type of women, based upon, like, in the world of Me Too, are reacting very different to the exact same work of art. And I feel like that's a sign of strength in a work of art, that it sort of acts as a Rorschach test on culture. Like, the movie stays the same, but it meant one thing 20 years ago. It means a different thing now, and who knows what it's going to mean 20 years in the future. And I've often thought about what it's like for you as an artist to have created something that is a fixed entity, but the conversation around it has changed so much and continues to evolve in really interesting ways. And obviously on the outside of it, it's interesting. On the inside of it, it might be something else. So I'm just kind of curious how that experience has been for you.
Yeah, no, it's a terrific question. And I can't remember if I had said this to Mike White, but on his podcast. But I look at the movies that I'm trying to make with the thought held in my mind very strongly that David Lynch had when he was making Blue Velvet. Because when he was questioned about Isabella Rossellini's masochism in Blue Velvet, and then the dangerous step into the land of what does this say about what you think about women, or what does this say about what you think about sex, his response was, I'm not quoting him exactly, but, essentially his response was, no. This movie is about this particular person in relationship to this other particular person. And so the question that, Rossellini's relationship to Dennis Hopper and Kyle MacLachlan, and, in Secretary, when I was making it, and to this day, in how I think about that movie or any movie I'm trying to make, I'm trying to be true to and understand the particular character as best I can, which comes with my own limitations, but and how they would experience this other person and how things would go between the two of them. Not how I want them to go politically or to make a point or to say something about people in general. Because the question of, what do you think the role of, power is in male-female relationships, that's a question that has 500 million dimensions to it, depending upon who you're talking about. And, in the case of Maggie Gyllenhaal's character and James Spader's character in that film, this is how it went between the two of them. And the miracle of that experience for the two of them is that they find something that, fits. The key goes into the lock. And the thing I'm interested in is the lock and the key, for the particular people. So, whether the movie was embraced by feminists 20 years ago and attacked now by feminists, and you have to ask the question, well, what's a feminist and what does that point of view mean? And then you have to tease that apart, and then you have to tease apart what all the shoulds that immediately have evolved from Me Too. This is okay, that is not okay. There's a lot of brutal categorization that's happening right now that is, terrible for a lot of people. I'm not saying it doesn't need to happen in certain cases. I mean, Harvey Weinstein was a monster, and there are monsters, but that there are also ways in which people have unusual needs and unusual desires, and those are not necessarily something to politicize automatically. There's a lot of, stupid reductiveness that's happening right now, across the board. It's not just about, male-female relationship. It's or power or sex. It's happening everywhere, and that's a different conversation, about media and the level of the conversation and all of that. But so just getting back to the center of your question, I don't really, I think that the object of the movie, as you say, is a kind of cultural Rorschach test. And it tells you more about the culture and more about the simplistic response than it does about the movie. The movie is its own world, and it's only about that world and those people. You have to imagine like you're looking through a little hole in the wall down a long corridor, and at the end you see that world and you get to look into it. And to make too many judgments is already to miss the point.
What's so rich to me in this, as you're speaking, is the connection to being the child of psychologists. Like there's in the psychologist's office, or the did you say psychiatrists?
Yeah, there's psychiatrists.
My father was a psychologist. That's why I made the mistake. Yeah, but there's like within the room, it has to be okay to unpack the things that the world would judge as deviant. And I feel in these three films in particular, that's what's happening over and over again. And so it's easy if you looked in on someone, if someone could look in on your therapy session and
help them.
and pick the worst thing that you are admitting to, like from your childhood, or the weirdest thing that happened in your relationship, and then blow that up as if it's the same as Harvey Weinstein. Yeah. I feel like there's something. This is not just to defend your films, but the things that your films are exploring, the will to pile on and bully on these characters is
Well,
something.
I'll give you, I mean, my response to that is that yes, of course, everything you're saying is absolutely accurate, but what we're up against is Hollywood, and to a large extent, the actors who are working in Hollywood. They don't want to play weakness. They don't want to play fragility. They don't want to play vulnerability. They don't want to play even oddness. They most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, with most of the people, they want to play something powerful and masculine and heroic in one way or another. And that's just not who people are. I mean, it's, it's an entire aspect of life and what human beings are and what one experiences is, it takes place in a dimension that has nothing to do with heroism or even bigness or even, pumping out your chest and being a person who endures through the most difficult of circumstances and so on and so forth. So, but it's that alone, to turn and look at that is already to say I'm trying to do something different, just something else. It's like I said to the French buyer, well, there's a lot of happy endings here. You could buy one of those movies, but it's difficult to get these films made because the actors don't want to play these characters in general, not exclusively. And by the way, unfortunately, we lost a lot of the actors who did want to play these parts. We lost Heath Ledger. I mean, it's crazy when you look at it, but, when he died and, a couple other guys died, we lost like 10, 12 of these movies a year because you can't replace them.
Yeah. Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Well, that being a huge one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we're a long way. As you're describing it, I'm just like, wow, what inspired me to become an actor was exactly the opposite. Was the James Deans and the Brandos and the Clifts and the I guess the Hoffmans and the Pacino, like all these guys who wanted to explore the weakness and the weirdness and the fragility. Yeah. But we live in a world of superheroes. So So let's shift a little bit. You collaborated on both Secretary and Fur with, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Erin Cressida Wilson. And I'd love to hear about how that collaboration came to be. And obviously, if you worked on two films together, there must have been something rich about it. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, she was a playwright in New York, and a mutual friend of ours introduced us. And I had made at the time a short film of Secretary, like a 25-minute movie. From the original Mary Gateskill story called Secretary that's in a book called Bad Behavior. And so I had the short film, and I had an idea of how it could be turned into a feature. And I had a couple of attempts at it, neither of which had worked, and I was pretty close to giving up on it. But when I had read one of Erin's plays and our friend introduced us, I thought, this is a person who's never written a movie, but who I think together we can find it. And, she's a terrific person. And, I think came from something of a similar point of view about both the short film and Mary Gateskill's story. She saw in it what I saw in it, and kind of took to the way in which I wanted to do it as a feature, which was quite different from how the short was and how Mary's story was. So it was going to take a leap into another realm. But, we just evolved a very good working relationship that was, totally, it was just a great meeting of the minds and a great happenstance. I'm sure from music, like you meet another musician and something about who that person is and how they see things just gels with you. And, from that, something really good can happen. So, I was lucky and she was lucky, and that's what happened.
So when it came to making Fur, did you work together to craft that script after the success of Secretary, or how did that happen?
That was a crazy situation because as I said, earlier on, I had grown up with Deanne, and I knew, the influence of her was very powerful. And I knew and had read several times the Patricia Bosworth story, the biography of Deanne, which was, a lot of people thought it was somewhat superficial in a lot of ways and inaccurate in other ways, but it was the only one that existed, and it had been a powerful book for me. But I also knew all sorts of other things about Deanne, and I had in my mind, crazily, a Diane Arbus movie. Like I knew how to make the movie on Diane Arbus, but I didn't own the rights to the biography. I had no access to any of it. And her estate and her daughters were particularly prickly about who was going to make the movie and all of that. And Ed Pressman, who's a great independent producer for 40, 50 years, one of the greatest American independent producers there's ever been, he called me up and he said, listen, we had been talking about a couple of other projects together, and he said, I've developed about 6 movies from the Diane Arbus biography, which he controlled, and I can't get any of them made. They're all too expensive. They're big period movies, or they're too esoteric, or they're too this, or they're too that. He's never been able to do it. And a whole bunch of various independent film directors had taken a swing at it. And he said, do you think you might be able to do it? Do you have any ideas for it? And I said, it's crazy, but I actually have a very strong, specific idea of how to make the movie about Arbus, and it's not going to cost $40 million to make. So I went in and I met with him and the other producer, who was Bonnie Timmerman, and I said, look, here's the movie. And but I said, this is how I think you make it. This is what I think it's going to cost. But my only caveat is I'm not going to make a Diane Arbus movie unless I have Final Cut. And that's up to you guys. But, if I were to jump in and do it, that's what it's going to take. And Ed, didn't hesitate. He said, no, I want you to have Final Cut. And, he expressed, total confidence in my capacity, but also in Erin's capacity and in our collaborative capacities to do it. And so, that fundamental idea in Fur to take the very first photograph that Deanne makes about an unusual person, in that case, Robert Downey, and to, in some sense, focus the movie on the making of that one photograph and how she got to the point where she could do it. The moment of transition in her life out of the commercial photography studio and her, essentially bourgeois life into the life that she would lead to become Diane Arbus. That was sort of the breakthrough idea to conceive of how you could do the movie. So, once we had that, we could run and run hard towards it. So, and the just as an example, Deanne was very involved in myth and in Alice in Wonderland, and the conceit of Deanne herself as a kind of Alice in Wonderland character, as Alice going into another world, was not. It's fantastical in a way in the movie, but it actually was her reality. That's how she felt about what she was doing. So, it was really interesting and compelling for me anyway, to make a movie about that feeling. How do you leave your home where your children and your spouse is to go out into the world to do something so unusual, but which your own curiosity is compelling you to do? That's a pretty great question in life and for a character. So
yeah,
so that was sort of how it worked,
And the film it really does a great job of that, just cinematically. But at the center of it, there's this really amazing performance from Nicole Kidman. Was she always, when did she come onto the project?
Well, it's funny. We were going to make the movie with Samantha Morton. And Samantha Morton, I went to London and I was working with Samantha Morton. And then Samantha Morton got into all kinds of personal difficulties and stopped returning not just my phone calls, but everybody else's phone calls. And the movie fell apart. And the financier was still wanted to make the film. And Bonnie Timmerman was friends with, I just want to make sure I get this right. She was friends with Nicole Kidman's acting coach. And the acting coach was going to fly to Australia to work with Nicole on a movie that she was going to do there with Russell Crowe. And Bonnie Timmerman gave the acting coach the script, and she read it and she said, yes, I will give this to Nicole. She flew to Australia, gave Kidman the script. Kidman read it, and within that week, the movie with Russell Crowe fell apart. And Nicole said, well, we could make Fur now. And the next thing I knew, I was flying to Sydney, and we had dinner, and we sat and we talked. And she said, yes, let's do it. And we went immediately into pre-production because her other movie had fallen apart and she wanted to do it as soon as possible. So it was, just a series of coincidences and happenstances that led to her being in the movie. And, the thing is, as I recall now, I remember thinking to myself, oh, this is much better, because we were going to have, Samantha Morton kind of looked like Deanne at the time, very big eyes, and she's short, and we could cut her hair to match. And I thought, no, this is much better, because Kidman as a presence, as a physical presence, rips you out of the reality of whoever you might have thought Diane Arbus was, if you knew who Diane Arbus was. And I certainly did. I knew what she looked like and all of that. And I just by instinct, I hate these biopics where, the actor is cast simply because they might have some kind of physical resemblance to the star. And it's never true. It's like Will Smith cannot be Muhammad Ali.
Yeah,
that's not acceptable. To me, I'm sure it works commercially or whatever, but I'm always embarrassed, that there's just oh, come on, really? And Kidman, for me anyway, transcended all that. It just ripped it into the land where it was, anyway, which is this kind of taking place in Deanne's mind. You know, it doesn't matter what she looks like physically because it's her mind that we're focused on.
The thing I realized watching Fur, going back and watching it, and I'm on this deep dive of looking at a lot of Nicole Kidman films because we're doing a whole month on her. Just feel like, even though she's incredibly famous, I just don't feel like she gets talked about as an actor in the same way that like people talk about like the love that people have for Nicolas Cage now. I feel like Nicole Kidman is in the same category. She's just, but whereas Nicolas Cage goes loud, she just gets quieter and quieter and quieter.
Well, the thing is, like, Nicole is a character actress in the body of an incredibly gorgeous creature. But she's fundamentally a character actor.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so, you know, she's not, I mean, to some extent, I adore Nicolas Cage, by the way, and tried to get him to do a movie recently, and he said no. Damn it! But
I thought he didn't. Does he say no?
He said, he says no a lot. So, but anyway, you know, the thing about Cage is like, there's always an aspect where you really do feel like Cage is, I don't know, using himself, you know, in a way that is a bit cartoony, let's say. There are exceptions to that, obviously, but you know, there's a kind of I don't know. I think Nicolas Cage, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do a movie with him was I think that he often is taking the easy way when the harder way would be so much more interesting.
Yeah.
But Nicole, I think, is just an actor who, I mean, there is truly something different in, you know, performance to performance to performance that's, I mean, you know, sometimes it's almost shocking, you know, how different she can be. And she does want to disappear and become who the character is. So, I mean, I don't, you know, her beauty and, you know, the sort of, you know, the incredible way she moves and all of that, you know, might make you think that she isn't, I don't know, like a character actor on the level of Philip Seymour Hoffman or something, but she is. There's no doubt about it, you know?
Yeah, in doing this research, the actor that I've been thinking about the most in watching her, one is sort of an easy touchstone is Barbara Stanwyck, but the deeper feeling I've been getting is Alec Guinness.
Well, that's a weird comparison, but okay.
They both get stronger the quieter they get, and they're both people who used the theatrics of makeup and hair and just like transform themselves in these ways that they're so good that they're not showy, right?
Yeah.
The transformation is so perfect that you just feel like, oh, well, that's just what she looks like now. It's like, no, she's wearing a wig. She's doing physical stuff.
Yeah.
And again, it's that silence. To me, especially, there was one particular scene in Fur where she's with Downey and you can almost feel like he's punked. Like she gets quieter and then he gets quieter and then and he gets quieter. And he's almost like mocking her with his silence. And I loved those scenes. And it just gave me this insight into her of like the power of silence as an actor. But it also made me curious as a director working with that. Were you aware of that? And like, because it felt like there's a way that sonically the film Fur, like just the creaking of floorboards.
Yeah. All that stuff is great. Yeah. I love all that stuff. Yeah. And well, we had an amazingly fantastic sound designer who remains on my team forever. But, you know, one of the things, it's interesting what you're saying because you're responding to something super subtle. And one of the things that we did do, which I noticed actually more like even when we started doing rehearsals, is what you're pointing to. And I ended up shooting, and this is something that I intend to continue doing forever, which is I shot the scenes without words often. So we might do, say, 4, 5, 6 takes with the text, with people speaking, and then we would do a pass once or twice where they were not allowed to talk, but they had to convey the scene by looking at each other. And a lot of the stuff that you're responding to were takes from those takes. So, you might have a line from Downey, but when you cut back to Nicole, it's a moment from the silent take. And so that becomes incredibly useful in terms of reaction shots and the feeling that somebody has to be in touch with when they don't have the words to go to. But, I remember one moment when we were shooting and I said cut, and Bill Pope, who was the DP, who's one of the great DPs who shot all the Matrix movies and stuff, and he was an old friend of mine, he came over to me, he said, man, I have never seen an actor that good every single take from action to cut. Like, there's literally we could have made the movie on Nicole with one take. And I really mean that. Like, we could have done a single take all the way through the film and had a beautiful movie. And I'm sure that any director who's worked with her knows exactly what I mean. It's just kind of stunning.
Yeah, I feel like that's the Stanwyck thing. Like, that's so that's the thing. She's like, you just get this sense that she is the ultimate pro as an actor. Exactly that. Like, watching good, whatever kind of film she's in, a good film, a great film, an okay film, or a bad film, she's always right there. Like,
she's like Federer. Yeah. It's just, you cannot describe or somehow put your finger on how beautiful that guy is when he's playing. And she's the exact same way. It's just a total mind boggler, and by the way, it's not to say like, that doesn't happen without work and questioning and conversation and going into what the character is experiencing and talking about that and trying things and so forth. There's it doesn't happen automatically, but it's just like Secretariat was a really great horse, and those were just the genetics. The horse could win the Triple Crown, so that's who she is.
Yeah. Well, on the other side, I'm just curious, are you a big fan of Tough Turf?
What's Tough Turf?
It was the film. It's a film from the late 80s starring James Spader and Robert Downey Jr. as young high school tough kids. So I never
even saw that movie.
When I see that you got you've worked with some pretty great people, you got this run of Jennifer Jason-Leigh, Maggie Gyllenhaal, and Nicole Kidman, 3 of the great actresses of their generation. And then you have this double, I'm excluding myself for your benefit. But then you go with Spader and Downey, and I was like, I'm a big fan of Tough Turf. And I was like, oh, wow, when's this Kim Richards film going to be?
Well,
she was also in Tough Turf, by the way. But how did Downey come to this project?
When we cast Downey, he was pretty down on his luck.
Yeah.
And, I adore Robert, and I think he's, he's taken a route that he chose, I think, quite consciously, and that's entirely about his life and his choices. But one wishes that he had continued in the direction of great performances, because he certainly wouldn't have been as rich as he is, but my goodness, he's one of our greatest actors. And again, he could still drive interesting movies if he wanted to make those choices. But we came to him because certainly, at least at the time, I was interested in his sort of beautiful vulnerability and tenderness, and a kind of a depth of experience, which again at the time he had recently come through so much trouble, and I wanted him to bring that to the movie, and to give the character a kind of otherworldly, sage-like quality. And Robert can have that, and he's incredibly touching person. So he was very right for the role. And I just I keep a list in my filing cabinet of actors that I just adore. And maybe one of the things that I think about now is not so much who's right for the part, but what would the part be in the hands of this person? Like, I'll just give you an example that pops into my mind off the top of my head. I adore Michael Shannon. And, a lot of people might say, well, Michael Shannon plays this sort of scary, aggressive, lunatic sort of character, and not so much the tender, softer, or average, or whatever the other character you might want Michael Shannon to play. He might not seem like that guy because he's been so consistently used in a particular part. But I like the question, what would this part be, or whatever it might be, with Michael Shannon playing it? And there was a sort of similar thing with Downey and Fur, where you had to ask yourself the question, like, well, what would it be if this incredibly unusual person were played by Downey? What would happen to it? And I think it was it took it into a kind of a mysterious land that I wanted. So the fit was there. It might not have been as easy to see, but it was there. And, what I believe in, or I'm interested in more and more, and almost exclusively, is, not so much how does the person look? Do they look the part? Because you can almost always make somebody look the part. But does their inner landscape, conveyed through their eyes with what we're going to do in the movie, does that work? And that's the basis for matching a character to a movie. You also have to, at some point, just be honest, which is you might go to 15 people and they might all pass on a script, and you end up with a person who, lo and behold, seems like the only person who possibly could have played the part. So, you have to be at the right, place and the right time for an actor's life too. Robert Downey's not going to play this character in Fur now.
Yeah, well, I'm glad he did. Like, I can't imagine. I'm sure you had a list of other people, but to me, thinking, I can't imagine anyone else playing that role now.
Sure, at this point, that's how it goes, right? Once they're in the movie, you're like, well, if the movie works, you think that guy was the only guy.
Really?
She was the only woman, yeah.
I can't really. I mean, just for kismet reasons and just for performance reasons, it's so perfect. And that was the beginning. It was really both actors. That film put both actors back on the map for me.
Well, no, I think listen, I remember Robert calling me, I don't know, maybe, I can't remember how long after Fur it was, and saying, hey, will you read the Iron Man script? I don't know if I'm going to do it. And I read it, and we talked on the phone, and I said to him, this is not a question of like, is this a good script or is this not a good script? This is a question of, do you want to take your life in this direction? That is what you have to answer. I can't tell you that, like, this is a lousy script or this is a good script. It's not even a script. It's not even a movie. It's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if you want to put on the spandex suit, that's up to you. That's going to be the trajectory that you take if you want to take that trajectory. That's it. You know, it's not about the script or this character, such as it is, you know.
Yeah.
So,
well, I've deliberately left two of your films out of this discussion. One, Hit Me, which I haven't seen, sadly. It's very hard to find. I actually tracked down a DVD and have ordered it because I need to fill that part of your filmography out.
Yeah.
But also Rupture, which I feel like is a big departure, but I'm just kind of curious if you feel like those two films bear some sort of...
Rupture, I think, exists in a similar realm in different ways. You know, I mean, I think I love horror movies. I don't like slasher movies or like many of the super violent movies. But what made me want to, first of all, what made me want to do it is that I was interested in, could I take the experience of fear and opening yourself up to your own terror within the context of a horror movie and make it almost about like this abstract spiritual dilemma. And in a way, Rupture is exactly the same as Fur. You know, Noomi Rapace, who is also just an absolute phenomenal person, entirely different from Kidman, but tremendous presence. In that movie, she's confronted with the way in which fear and transcending it is transformative, and how allowing yourself to experience fear can cause monumental changes in your life. And that's the exact same thing that Diane Arbus's character was doing. So somebody who knew me, actually, I think at one point, she said, she laughed, you know, this was before we were shooting. She's like, "You've already made this movie." I said, well, it's kind of true, you know, but this is in a completely different box. You know, it's a completely different music box. And for sure, that's true. But for me, it was like, it posed certain challenges. I'll just give you one example. You know, in that movie, for a tremendous amount of time, I can't remember what it was on the clock, but, you know, maybe it's like a full hour of the movie, you have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And the character has no idea what's going on. And I wanted to see, one of the things that turned me on about it was I wanted to see how long that could be sustained, which is in a certain way the experience of going into your own fears. You get very lost in what the hell is happening to you, and you can really not know. And you need guides on that, in that sense. I mean, you need people who are helping you. You can't do that on your own, really. You know, you either need a really good psychiatrist, or you need a really good spiritual teacher, or a really good friend, or a really good spouse, or you know, you need help. And she has help in the movie, but all of it is taking place, again, you know, in a sort of mind space. And, you know, what's happening in her is fundamental, just like what's happening for Maggie Gyllenhaal, or, you know, in a way for your character in The Prom, and for Diane Arbus's character. And I'm sitting here drawing storyboards for this Juliette Binoche movie, and I'm asking myself the same question, you know, which is what is happening to her in this movie, and point by point, beat by beat, where she's being forced to see an aspect of herself that she's kept at bay for her whole life. So, and it's in a completely different music box in this case, for sure. So, yeah, I think, what's happening inside the character that really matters is always the question that I'm drawn to. I'm not drawn to, like, political dramas like Oliver Stone or giant gorgeous canvases like De Palma or something like that. I'm interested in what happens between the ears of the central character and how it's a challenge. And in that sense, just going back to the question of those movies, they're all dealing with that in one way or another.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Sadly.
No.
I wish I could just make a Western.
So you know what? I feel it, because I want you to be successful, but I wouldn't want you to put on the spandex suit.
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, it's like, yeah, I mean, I'm, as I say, from going back to one of the first things I started with, these things that we're talking about and that are sort of compel me to try to make the stack of scripts that are on my desk. It's not the average fare, and things have gotten worse and more difficult and more banal and more obvious and all the rest of it. So, the pleasure of making, constructing the beautiful violin with its neck and its body and its strings and all the rest of it. The thing that makes that instrument beautiful, the thing that makes the movie beautiful, not a lot of people are interested in that anymore. And more so in this country than anywhere else. But like I'll just give you an example. Like I adore the Italian filmmaker Paolo Sorrentino, who made, I think, one of the greatest movies of the last 25 years or so, a movie called The Great Beauty. And, the movie's so beautiful. It's so tremendous. It's so awe-inspiring that you just shake your head and think, well, or you look at a movie like The Handmaiden, that Park Chan-wook made. I mean, these movies cannot be made in this country anymore. There's no way, it's like there's no financier would ever put that kind of money behind such a film. And, one could draw a very long list like that, although there aren't that many movies that are as great as The Great Beauty and The Handmaiden. But so it's, it's super difficult because you can't make a movie like Fur, for $5 million, $6 million. It's impossible. Mm-hmm. You have to have the time and the money to make those sets and to be able to get those performances and to make those shots and so on and so forth. It's like they're not movies that are made for very little money. And once you get above a certain budget level now, there's, a financier does not ask the director the question, what do you think it's going to take to make a beautiful movie? They don't. They ask the question, what's the least amount of money that you can possibly spend to get part of this movie on screen? That's the nature of the landscape now.
Yeah,
so
it sucks to live in a shithole country, doesn't it?
Well, things are getting better. January 20th is coming.
Yeah, let's hope. There's one other thing that I really wanted to explore with you, because when we worked on The Prom, I didn't know who Dennis Johnson was. It was a name on a script, had no idea who it was. And then when I read Jesus' Son, mm-hmm. I didn't put it together. I was like, I love this novelist, and I read a couple of his books before I realized, wait a second, I was in a movie this guy wrote.
crazy, man.
And I'll tell you, I wrote a book a few years ago, actually like eight or 9 years ago now. And when I did, I had a weird synchronicity with a line that I found in Tree of Smoke that was in our movie. I think the gift, he used the line, "the gift of desperation," in Tree of Smoke. And so I sent him my book and I wrote to him and I said, "Hey, I'm a new author and I just, I wanted to connect with you because of this wild synchronicity." And he was so nice and he wrote back and we exchanged emails, and he had actually invited me out to visit him in Idaho, and it didn't work out.
Oh, too bad. But I'm sorry to hear that.
I know. I feel very, very sad about that. But I've been so curious, and you collaborated on 2 films together, and he is such a great novelist. Yeah, tell me about your connection with Dennis.
Oh, I mean, it's painful to talk about because he was such a great person, and one of the greatest people I've ever known, for sure. And I know that anybody who knew him and was friends with him would have said the same thing. I lived part of my life in Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and we had a beautiful house in the woods. And when I was very young, I was talking on the phone with my dad, and I said, hey, I read this great first novel called Angels by Dennis Johnson. And my dad laughed and he said, "Dennis lives down the road, man." And I said, "You got to be kidding me." And I said, "That's nuts." And he said, yeah, he lives down the road. If you want to talk to him, I'll put you guys in touch. And I said, "Well, I'd be interested in knowing if he'd had an interest in making Angels into a movie." I was like 23. Maybe I was 22, 23. And he said, "Well, I'll mention it to him the next time I see him walking his dogs in the woods." So he mentioned it to Dennis, and the next thing we were on the phone and we were talking about it. And we made a deal for me to option it for like $10. And we exchanged pages on the script. And anyway, we came to a script, and then I went out to see my dad, and I went to meet him. And I got out of the car. I'll never forget this. I got out of the car, and he came out of his house, and he looked at me and he said, "You motherfucker, you're just a fucking kid." And I said, "Yeah, but. And that became the beginning of a very long collaboration and friendship in many different ways. And, he was just a profoundly unusual person. And, an incredible genius. I mean, somebody who, with an hour at the typewriter could do better than most people for a year at the typewriter. Yeah. He just had a facility that and a soul that were totally special and beautiful. And so it was I think anyone who knew him was somewhat in shock by what he was like. That's what I'll say. It was not the experience of him was not like the experience of most people. He's just a totally unusual guy from, I assume, for his whole life, but certainly I knew him, when he was quite young. When we first worked on Angels, he wasn't that much older. Maybe he was in his mid-30s. He's just. I never knew anybody like him. So
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks for talking about him. It's always, yeah, I get it. When there's someone who's an artist and we know him as an artist, and then you know them as a person, it's a lot. It's a lot harder to talk about. I've almost every one of his books that I've read, I've thought this should be a movie.
Well, I mean, there's lots of people who have tried, are trying. They're not easy adaptations. He did some of them. He and I did an adaptation of Jesus' Son, not the script that got made, before the script that got made. And there were other their producers and so forth who I contemplated Tree of Smoke myself for quite a long time, but I just felt like it was beyond me, that I just couldn't. I don't believe I would be the right person to do that kind of gigantic canvas, but certainly people have tried and are trying still. So, but it falls into the category that we were talking about, so, these things don't just, they don't become movies without some amazing luck and somebody who comes along and believes,
Yeah. Tree of Smoke seems like it's a huge one. I'm surprised. I was like, I feel like Resuscitation of a Hanged Man or Stars at Noon would be the Shainberg, Dennis Johnson projects that I'd love to see.
Stars at Noon. I mean, I think
that's a great.
And there's a producer here in New York, I think, who's been trying to do Resuscitation of a Hanged Man. So those are not. Those are smaller scale for sure. But you. I mean, in a way. I don't know. It would take somebody phenomenal, to be able to adapt them now, without Dennis around,
right?
To at least in some ways be helpful, I don't know. It's. Why don't you give it a shot? See if any of those things are available and try it. If you want to really experience some unhappiness.
Time passes. Whew, what do you think about that interview, Brian?
That's great. And, it wasn't quite at Larry Bishop length, which is a little disappointing. I was missing that extra 90 minutes on top of that hour.
He didn't have so many. He didn't have as many actors to talk about.
But it was still very fruitful. And I think he really hit it. And I think we're definitely like, this is why one of the reasons why we're doing this month is like, yes, Nicole Kidman is a character actor trapped in a beautiful person's body. And that's exactly, I think, why the world is wrong about her. Because some people just haven't caught on to that yet, who don't understand that's why she is as good as a Nicolas Cage or a Steve Buscemi. I think it's hard because actresses tend to not be thought of as character actors, mostly only actors, because male actors tend to be weirder looking. So I think it's like that was a really good insight and very true.
Yeah. Is there anything you wish I'd asked?
No, I think you did. I think you did good. I can't think of anything. I also really it was interesting to learn about Downey, like kind of going from this to Iron Man for Downey and actually having Shainberg read the script to kind of ask his advice. And it seemed like he gave the right advice, and Robert Downey Jr. just ended up doing whatever he wanted anyways. But and becoming, this bigger, global superstar that he is now.
Yeah, so, I get sort of where they're both coming from.
Yeah,
if I was Robert Downey Jr. and I went through what he went through, I'd want some like protect me money.
Yeah.
It's a different thing. It's a different thing because he was an artist and he got kicked around, by himself, but also by everybody else. And I think when you've had that experience, there's this sense of like, this could all go away. And
it's not like we only got like 2 great little movies from Downey before he made these big, there was a good 25, 30 years of him being this amazing, eccentric, crazy actor in movies. And then when he's in his 50s, he wants to be in these giant big movies. Great. Who cares? Like, that's better than like Dirty Grandpa or whatever crap Robert De Niro's doing, as an old man. Like, sure, like make these big comic book movies. They're not for me, but they're clearly for everybody else on planet Earth. So good for you. And it's funny because there was, I think it was, I don't remember what late night show it was on. I don't know if it was like a Conan O'Brien or what it was. But at the time that Iron Man came out, the question was asked by the host, like, why did you make this movie? Like, it's so interesting to see a big $200 million movie with you as the star. Like, how did you get to this point? This is so interesting. And he's like, well, I made a movie Fur. And then the host was like, oh, what? I don't know what that is. I've never heard of it. And Downey was like, exactly. I make these movies that nobody sees. I want to make a movie that everybody sees. And that's why I'm doing Iron Man. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And I think the most interesting takeaway from the interview for me was his technique of filming silent takes, which knowing that I listened to the interview before seeing the movie, and knowing that going into the movie, like any movie I make, I want to do that now too. That's such a great idea. I don't know if he's the first to do that, but that's really smart. Like, that's a really smart way to also get what you want out of editing. Like, if the scene didn't quite work and you don't realize it till after you filmed it, just cut to someone thinking or emoting without saying anything. I think that's great. And that works for an actress like Nicole Kidman, who just puts it all in. That you could, like, what would this movie be like if it was all silent? I would love to see the director's cut of this with just the silent takes. That would be amazing. I wish that existed.
Honestly, someone should do, like, and by someone, some night when I'm really high, I should do a super cut of just Nicole Kidman silences. I bet you could make a great 2-hour movie just grabbing. It's sort of like what I did with the John Bryan thing.
Yeah.
Where you just, like, across her movie, just her silent reactions and looking at things.
Yeah, yeah.
She does silence. I don't know anyone who does silence better. Maybe right now I'm fully, I don't know, overcome with kid mania. So there may be, but also she's in an age of sound technology where just sound design on films is so, like, I don't know, Barbara Stanwyck or Ingrid Bergman or Greta Garbo probably all use silence wonderfully, but there's always this crackle and hiss in their work, so they don't get to really use silence.
Yeah.
And the way Nicole Kidman uses her silences, and if you know it, if you watch it now, it doesn't matter what movie, it's like, I don't know, now it's like when Nicole Kidman getting quiet is like watching Tom Cruise run.
You want it in every movie. You want it.
And you're going to get it. And you're going to get it.
And in this movie, she's really quiet. Like you said in the interview, like it kind of forces you to, like, kind of lean closer into towards the TV, towards the movie screen, to kind of be like, oh, what is she saying? It gives you that intimacy, and that adds so much emotion to the story. And then that once that small quiet talk turns into total silence, then you're really drawn in. Then you're really just like, you're just stuck watching this person in a movie.
I really encourage people, if you're inclined this way, try and imagine, like, if you watch a couple of her films and get into her way of being, try and imagine living in that being that she is, because it's not just the voice. The way she's using her eyes, the way it's like this thing that's in motion all the time, but totally still. It's such an odd thing. And we're going to get into it. There's a scene in Birth, which I feel like this and Birth, they were made in the same period, and they're almost like the same film, but different. They're different stories, different tone, but they take place in this New York, this very quiet, wealthy New York. I don't know, just there's a sense of mystery and awakening and impending nightmare if you get caught, and closing in, sort of oppressive apartments that are also really ornate. And I'm really looking forward to talking about that in our next episode with your buddy Zach. But did you see Birth?
Oh yeah, I love that movie. That movie, and you're right. This movie feels like that in the way of like sort of this this person who's trying to act on her emotions, but kind of with this battle of like what she should be doing according to everyone around her, as opposed to what she feels like she should be doing, being true to herself. And Birth very much has that as well as this movie.
Fur and Birth, and it's what Nicole Kidman at that point in her career, and when you're looking at an artist, you're like, okay, well, look at what she's exploring.
And I'm glad that she's still, like, from this movie all the way up to now, she still will do these weird little movies, like truly take a chance. Like, is she the biggest star to do that? Like, it's like peeps being that famous as she is, like she's known around the world. She is truly a superstar, but she'll do all these strange little movies. Like this movie doesn't seem like an expensive movie. This is definitely not a movie for everybody. Like, I totally get why people don't like this movie. Like, I understand it. It's not the movie that's everybody's cup of tea. But I love that she'll read a script like this and be like, all right, when are we going to do it? Let's do it. Like, my Russell Crowe movie fell apart. Like, let's do this weird little thing that not a lot of people will see. And she's never lost that. Like Robert Downey Jr. kind of only does big movies now. He doesn't go back to the furs anymore. He has kind of just stuck with Dr. Dolittle and like movies that are huge. But Nicole Kidman always goes back to these little movies.
As we discussed in our intro episode, Nicole Kidman has never had a bad year.
No. Yeah.
I mean, Robert Downey Jr. had some bad years. Again, people make different choices for.
Yeah.
I have the sense that by the turn of the millennium, Nicole Kidman has never had to make a choice based upon money or desperation or like other than like, oh, there's good money for this and I get to do this. Yeah, of course. Or you pay me what I'm worth. Of course. But never like, oh man, if I don't take this, this whatever movie, I might lose my house. I can't pay my lawyer's fees or whatever they.
But Robert Downey Jr.'s fine now. Like, he's got trillions of dollars. He can make a fur again. He can go back to doing that if he wanted to.
But staying focused on like the Nicole Kidman thing about, you're right. Like, she does continue in Paperboy, which we kicked off this whole adventure with. It's such a different film, and it's like 10 years later.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I hope that as she gets older, she keeps taking chances forever. Like, I'm trying to think of who is an actress in their 70s or 80s, that kept on like trying new, different things. Like, I don't know. She might be the only one.
Star like that.
That could, yeah.
I mean, yeah, there definitely are, but people who are that level of star. There's another film. I want to get back to talking about fur, and there's another film that I want to talk about that I thought about a lot. That's from around the same time, which is Human Nature.
Oh yeah, that's a great movie.
I love that film. It's one I'd love to cover on the show sometime. That's one of the. I feel like that's the least heralded Charlie Kaufman script.
Yeah.
Patricia Arquette and Tim Robbins and Rhys Ifans, and I believe that's who it was.
Yes,
that's his name. Yes, and it's another story in this case, about a hirsute woman. And when I was watching for this, I kept thinking about Human Nature and thinking, oh well, that's an almost too obvious double feature. I think Fur and Birth is the real double feature to dig into. But you're a fan of Human Nature?
Yeah. And all these movies, I wish there's not movies like this anymore. Like, watching Fur, I just kept thinking like these kind of strange small films that actually get seen by some people. Like, they don't make these movies anymore. Like, the things that come out of film festivals and the small movies people make don't quite have this kind. It's not quirky. I feel that's not the right word to describe what these movies are, but they're just like, they're different. They're not like big. They are the alternative to the big movies. Like, I think small movies now kind of feel like resumes or business cards to make the bigger movie, whereas something like Fur or Human Nature is its own thing. And in that interview, Shainberg talked about that it's like so hard, and he's got this pile of scripts on his desk, and it's so hard to make movies that have a downer ending or isn't like the thing you normally see. And I feel like that is lacking now, and I wish that would come back. Like, I wish there was a way that people could make money off of strange little, interesting character studies, or, just like the actual alternative to Iron Man,
Yeah. You hipped me to something that I should have known, but I didn't, which is that Alan Arbus portrayed in Fur an imaginary portrait of Diane Arbus. I got to say it every time just because I feel like we can't just say Fur. Say Fur, an imaginary portrait of Diane Arbus. So Alan Arbus is played in that by the actor Ty Burrell. But Alan Arbus, who is Diane Arbus's husband, is also, and I didn't put this together at all, the Alan Arbus who we know, if we're fans of MASH, as Sidney, the therapist, the psychologist, the psychiatrist who visits MASH 4077th many times, including being featured in the final episode, which was, I think, still ranks as one of the most viewed TV shows of all time.
Yeah.
TV episodes live of all time. And then you turned me on to the fact that he was in the film Greaser's Palace.
Yeah.
That was directed by Robert Downey Sr.
Yeah.
And so all this time, this whole week, while I've been trying to get my mind around that, it's been being pretty well blown. And I have some things I want to say about that. But since this was your revelation, I wanted, so do you know Alan Arbus from Greaser's Palace, or were you a MASH fan, or when did you put this all together?
I've never been able to watch MASH ever. That's a show that I cannot watch. There's something about the theme song that's so depressing that when I was a child, when it came on in syndication, it was like why I've also never really watched Cheers. I was just like, this is for grown-ups. I can't watch this. This is not for me. And so that I would never watch it because like this theme song was so sad. Like the same reason why I haven't watched Taxi, because the theme song's just so sad.
Oh,
something about
three of my favorite shows.
Because it's a half-hour show. You're telling me this half-hour show is supposed to be funny, but then you have the most depressing theme song. And so when I was a kid, when I was like 8 or 9, when these shows were on, the theme song would come on after Three's Company or whatever show I loved, and I would be like, oh, I got to change the channel. This is not for kids. This is a grown-up thing. I'm not going to understand what the show is. So it's still like in my brain as a grown-up. I hear these theme songs and I'm like, I think this is for grown-ups. I can't watch this. Though I am a grown-up now, I should be able to watch them. But it's like it's a weird, Pavlovian response to this music. I like the MASH movie, but looking up Alan Arbus. Because I didn't know a lot about Diane Arbus. I wanted to kind of know about her before watching this movie, and so when it mentioned that her husband became an actor, I was like, oh, I wonder if he became anyone of note that I would have recognized anything. And then I saw the picture of him, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's the star of Greaser's Palace. Like I can turn to the right from my computer and look at the box on the shelf, and there he is on the cover. And then I'm like, wait a minute, that's directed by Robert Downey Jr.'s dad. Wait, so did Robert Downey Jr., when he signed on to do this, know that this is a person he's definitely met as a kid? Like, so that
he's
whole
in
thing
the movie.
Was, he's
Robert
in the
Downey
movie.
He's in the
as
movie
a little kid, yeah. And then Alan Arbus shows up in other Downey Senior movies. So it's like it's clearly he was a part of that group that made these sort of. And for those of you who don't know, like Robert Downey Sr., Robert Downey Jr.'s dad, was this amazing, brilliant kind of outsider artist in New York in the 60s. His big kind of outsider movie was Putney Swope, which is this brilliant satire. And then he just kept making these sort of weird, interesting, sort of like a kind of a version of an experimental art film, but like kind of also zany and funny, so they don't come off as too pretentious. They're really good. I definitely recommend checking any of them out. But yeah, the fact that Helen Arbus is the star of Grease's Palace and Robert Downey Jr. is a kid in it, and then he's in this movie as a character, it's such a weird thing that I'm sure was totally an accident that that he ended up in this movie, and that was it's like, yeah,
accident. You saying that to Mr. Synchronicity here? Come on. Accidents. This is what happens. Again, I think that's also just sort of the byproduct of what I was talking about before, that sort of kismet of you have the right artist working with the right project, and then Kidman coming in as sort of like surprisingly being the right actor at that point to then build this whole thing around. And of course, it just like at that point you have this flow of synchronicity plus Hollywood money to, grease the wheels of that particular palace. and yeah, so then synchronicities start to appear. I think that Dr. Sidney Friedman might love to get you on the couch and figure out what it is about this sad music that makes you an adulthood that turns you off. You might, you might find you wake up and realize that chicken wasn't actually a chicken; it was a baby. No, that was a little bit of inside humor for those millions of people who did watch.
Everyone but me. Yeah.
No. And it did make me think of something else. And this is it's one of these things when you start to research a film you love, you might stumble across something that becomes a criticism that would never have been there if you hadn't done the research that you did because you loved the film. It's sort of like that sort of the Mr. Arcaden paradox. Like if you start to research someone, you change, whatever, you find out things you don't want to know. Anyway, and one of the things that kind of bums me out about this film now is that Ty Burrell and Nicole Kidman are very not Jewish.
Definitely.
Maybe Ty Burrell is Jewish, but he's not Alan Arbus Jewish. And I just feel like it would be and Steve Shainberg is Jewish. So is Jonathan Glazer. And films like Fur and Birth both capture a feeling of a New York kind of Jewishness that I have some friends who lived in that world, and it's accurate. It's like a non-Jewish Jewishness. So it's a weird thing to mention or to feel like I have to mention. And it's not even really a criticism, although, because I can't imagine having the same response to it. And maybe that's my own internalized anti-Semitism. I can't even imagine watching this if Ty Burrell were Alan Arbus and if Nicole Kidman were, played by Melanie Mayron. I just rewatched Girlfriends. So that's why I have, or not rewatched. I just watched the film Girlfriends, and I thought, I've been thinking about Melanie Mayron as a great Jewish actress of the 70s who was very, again, it wouldn't have worked in terms of casting, but my point is, would it have worked with the sterility that it portrays? What was that studio like with Alan Arbus as that photographer? He's not Ty Burrell.
Yeah.
He's just a more interesting person than that character. So again, it's not, I know it doesn't mess with the film, but it messes with me.
But you're not the only one to bring that up. Like in the reviews I've read, a lot of people's complaint is that of like, how dare you cast like this great Jewish artist as like this red-haired, beautiful Australian actress. Like that's a few people have made that note. Who would, like in 2006, what Jewish actress would be playing Diane Arbus? Like, I don't know who were the popular ones but do you remember? Like back then, like who would be?
No, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if Catherine Keener is Jewish. She probably isn't, but she sometimes gets cast as that, Julia Louis-Dreyfus.
Sarah Jessica Parker.
I don't. This is the thing. I'm not quibbling with the casting. I think that Fur is, I don't want to say a perfect movie, but it achieves a kind of perfection that every director should strive for, which is to have that moment when you get the opportunity to tell the story that you know you were born to tell, and all the resources align for you to do it, and you do it.
Yep.
It's like, it's a thing with Michael Apted and Thunderheart and Incident at Oglala, and that's with Steve and this. So I don't quibble about any of it. It's just that in doing the research, now there's a part of my mind that wants to see the Arbus family story with but Alan Arbus is dead, and I can't. You'd have to know them, and that's the problem that you'd get. Then you would have got the film that you didn't want to watch, and which was a biopic trying to tell the truth instead of the poetic, the artistic truth, and to get.
And the thing is, for the people that were sad that this movie wasn't that, you can still make that movie, because this movie is not that at all. So that movie can still be made if you want to have the more straightforward Diane Arbus movie. No one's made that yet, so you can do that, and it won't take anything from this movie, and this movie won't take anything from that movie, because it couldn't be any more different than a movie like that.
Let me see. There's a couple of other interesting points. I listened to. Actually, I would just say if you can listen to the director's commentary on it, Steven has a very soothing voice. And he has a lot of interesting insights into. He's very aware of the real story, and it's fun to listen to him talk about, like, when she's walking down the hall and she's looking at all these photos in Lionel's apartment, and they're photos that he knows are from people who were big influences on her, and so they wouldn't have been there, but they are there in her dream world.
Yeah,
and seeing the way that he subtly encodes these, I mean, it would be insulting to call them Easter eggs. It's more like, it's encoding, and it's filling that world with, again, like Diane Arbus's dream. Really, really great film, great actress, great actors, and Steve Shainberg, the director. Now, we haven't talked about Secretary at all. I talked a little bit with Steve about it in the interview. What are your thoughts on Secretary?
I love that movie. It made for a very awkward first date when I first saw it. I took someone to it, and it was our first date, and that was not maybe the right movie to see for the first, or maybe it was the really right movie to see for the first date.
Was there a second date?
Yes, and a third and a fourth. So okay. I guess it ended up work. I guess, I'm wrong. Great first date movie. But no, I really like that movie a lot. Like that's one of those movies that the fans of it are kind of ruin it. I think, like, at least working at the video store, like the type of people that would come in and be really excited about that movie would make me not want to watch that movie or not like it. But because I've seen it and know that it's really good, it's like the people that like Sons of Anarchy a lot, or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Like, don't let them ruin the thing that is actually good. But it's, I think that movie's great. And I think just like this movie, it's just like the two leads are so good in it. And like, it is difficult, and it's about things that may be something you don't agree with, or things that are different than your life, but their relationship and the way they do it sells it, and you're drawn into the world. Like, it's when people complain about these movies and being like, this is bad, this is not how people are, but you love The Sopranos or Goodfellas, like, you're fine watching people like shoot each other, and that's not a world that you would actually be a part of either. It's kind of a contradiction, I feel. But people are, sex is different and pushes some very heavy buttons for many people in different ways, so it's definitely a bold subject matter, just like this movie, just like The Prom. I think like Shainberg likes to, push buttons, but not in a shitty way, not in a I'm trying to be shocking way, but more in like, these buttons should be pushed. These things should be talked about in movies. Why not? Just because it makes you uncomfortable or it's different doesn't mean it shouldn't these people shouldn't do that. And I really liked in the interview how he talked about that he's just writing these characters and then the characters kind of take over. And I totally get that. And maybe that's not a thing that non-artists understand. But that totally happens. Like that even happens with like painting. If it's like eventually you kind of get into the flow and you get kind of really into your right brain and it just sort of becomes its own, it kind of snowballs into its own thing. Like, not that an artist should kind of take no responsibility for the things they make, but that does happen, especially if you get two people in a room talking. Like, that's a writer exercise they teach you in college. Like, think of two characters, get them talking, and then eventually you're just transcribing what they're saying. And that's how you can write. And that's what Secretary is very much. It's just like, yeah, these aren't people that maybe you know normally or that you do, or maybe it is. But I love that it's there and it exists.
Yeah. I feel like there was one other piece I wanted to ask you about. Oh, when I said I was going to interview Steve, you wanted me to ask about Erin Wilson and about Dennis Johnson. And I was just curious if you have any relationship to the work of Erin Cressida Wilson or Dennis Johnson before this.
I mean, not Erin Wilson, but Dennis Johnson. I don't know if it's because of an Olympia thing, but like when Jesus' Son came out as a movie, that was like the movie that everybody talked about and everybody wanted to see, you know? And like that was something, there was just something about that movie that clicked with a lot of my friends and myself. I can't even remember when that movie came out, somewhere in the early aughts. And so that's why I was interested, because it was really surprising to see that the student film that you were in, that Shainberg directed, was written by him. And it's funny in the interview that you didn't realize that until much later, that at the time, was he like on the set at all?
No.
When you were making it? He just wrote the script and wasn't even a part of the production?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And then I just watched, he wrote Hit Me, based upon the Jim Thompson story or novel that Steve did as his first, I guess, real feature. And yeah, and they shot that in Tacoma.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, there's a whole Northwest connection. And whether or not he knew it, I don't think Steve knew about my Olympia connection when he cast me in The Prom.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's one of those. The involvement of Dennis Johnson in The Prom has always been one of those really weird, sort of too heavy to think about synchronicities for me, just because of sort of what I said in that interview. Like, I love, when you really fall for a writer, it's an investment. Like, it's not like liking a director. It's not like even liking a musician. Like, when you like a writer, every book is like, it's a joy, but it's an investment and it's very intimate. And if it gets to the point where you really love that voice, it's irreplaceable. It's like, it's the, and it's a commitment on their part. Not that it isn't a commitment to make a movie or write or do any of these other things, but there's just something about that. And then that he's got a Northwest connection and all of that sort of like crept up on me. It's one of those areas where I kind of get chills. And then watching Hit Me and thinking about how that's all happening right in a line with P.T. Anderson's growth and with the same kind of actors. It's just, it makes me, it's so hard not to wish that Steve Shainberg had a different career than he does, because I'm so happy for the career he has. And it's just, I want to see him get to make more movies. There's something, and on a personal level, not on a personal level like I would get to be in them, but on a personal level, like I feel like all of his films are personal to me, in part because of my personal experience with him. But I'd like to think that even if I didn't, that would be there. But because it is, I can't subtract it. It's like doing the show with you and having you be from Olympia. There's something about that gives it this extra. There's some. It's like real. I don't know what. Organic, indigenous, whatever. However you want to it's like that kismet thing of like I was talking about with Steve and the Deanne Arbus story. When people find themselves working with the people that they should be working with, not because they orchestrated it that way, but because that's the way things work when you're doing the right work.
Uh-huh.
Which is what Fur is ultimately about, is about someone finding that if they follow, even following the weird path is like, or the weird path is the true path, and it'll all work. And it doesn't, it's all going to work out, but you will, because things didn't work out for Diane Arbus too much, but she did make some great work. Anyway, do you feel like we've covered this film?
Yeah, look, can we talk about The Prom for a second?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because it was interesting to see, like, so how I really liked it. I think, honestly, that it's maybe my favorite Shainberg movie out of the ones that I've seen, because it has that kind of spooky indie feeling that I got like when I first saw like Sex Lies and Videotape, or like there's just something about like somebody, like, it's really rare to see a young person, like a college student or whatever age he was when he made that, make something that seems so raw and so true and like really doing a very good job. Like, that's hard to do in a movie. Like, make this movie that feels like I'm just sucked into this world so quickly. I just loved it. I thought it was great. And so, like, how does one make a student film with all these famous people in it? Like Jennifer Jason-Leigh is like, she was a big star by the time that was made. Like, was this through a program? Like, do you know how it all felt together?
Yeah. So it's not just any student film. He was he was a student at the American Film Institute in Los Angeles. And every year, at least at the time, I don't know what the program's like now, but that year, 3 or 5 other directors out of a class of 25 to 50, maybe 100, were chosen to make a feature film, and they were given enough of a budget to do it. Plus, they had a deal with a lot of agencies and the union that you could do these films for free. So, like, I had a friend I was going out with Tuesday night from Nightmare on Elm Street 4. I remember she was working on an AFI film around the same time that had James Earl Jones in it. And so they worked, you could work for free on this and get some sort of agency credit or something. It's just working with young directors who would go on to be this next generation of directors. For me, I don't know why James Earl Jones did it. I know why Jennifer Jason-Leigh did it, because they were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time. And why I did it was because because they invited me to, and it was, it was just such an interesting role. But yeah, that's how he got all those great people. And I think he had some connection to Mammoth World, which is how the J.T. Walsh and Natalia Nagulich connections came in. But that might also have been through Jennifer, because they were very much a couple at that time.
What's it like being directed by somebody with on their first outing compared to someone who's made a bunch of movies already?
Well, I know with Steve, just the attention, the attention that he was able to bring to it. Like, I'd never worked on something where we rehearsed for weeks before. I would go over and hang out with him and Jennifer and just rehearse and talk about the film. And something about, also, since everyone was working for free, there was just a lot less attitude in this weird way. I don't know. It was a very pure filmmaking experience. But I think it would have been a different thing if you're trying to make your first film and you don't have the support of the American Film Institute. And it was still stressful. Like, I'm watching, it's fun because I'm watching in both Secretary, but particularly in Fur, I'm watching Steve do camera moves that are so elegant, and I know what he's going for because I watched him try to get people to do that on a crappy track in some house somewhere and get so frustrated that he couldn't get a fucking push in. on some shot. And at the time, there were these moments I remember, I remember all the good times generally, but I remember the tense times specifically. Yeah. And whenever I see a really beautiful, elegant, flowing push in or camera move in one of Steve's films, I just feel so happy for him, because he's
getting what he wants. You got it.
Well, it's not even just like you get to see and I love it. Makes that frustrating moment from all that time before, and not frustrated at me, just watching him just get mad at something that I didn't understand. Yeah. And now I watch it, I'm like, well, of course, because you want this to do that, and they just couldn't.
And it's interesting watching his two movies and like this week, and like knowing Secretary. It's like I feel like the world is wrong about him. Like, he definitely is a unique filmmaker with a very unique perspective that is his own. But he's just not talked about in the same way as his peers. Like, you talk about Hard Eight, like he came up the same time as Tarantino and both Paul Thomas Anderson and Wes Anderson and all these people who came out of this sort of 90s indie scene. But he just isn't part of the conversation, and he should be. Like, all of his movies are what he wants to make. And it's just like, yeah, it's sad that he doesn't get to make, the movies he wants to make right now. But I hope that we get to see more. But I think that I want people to kind of know his name, and I want people to look at his whole body of work. And is The Prom, can people watch that anywhere?
Well, someone might upload it to Vimeo and put it put a link to it on our website. And if nobody was out there stopped that someone from doing it, then you could go there and you could see it, and it might be there. That's all I'm gonna say.
I want to see a nice like Criterion of Secretary in like 5 years.
With the Prom on,
and put the Prom as an extra, because like when they put out, I think it was Election, they have the early film that Alexander Payne made that's on there, and it's just great to see. Sort of like this hour-long kind of college student film. It's inspiring to see something that's clearly cheap and like not fancy looking, but well done. And it's just great to see that like that person can go from that to making a movie with Nicole Kidman within 15 years or whatever. So it's like it's a good inspiration for young filmmakers to see like, yeah, you can make this weird little thing and maybe no one saw it, but if you just keep at it and keep honing your craft, you too can direct Robert Downey Jr. in a hairy suit.
Yeah.
So.
And have you seen his film Rupture?
I really want to now, though. Like, that looks... I'd never even heard of that. That's the problem. I've never even heard of that movie. Why? I should have heard of that movie.
And really odd. Really, I think it might be more in your wheelhouse than mine. The first time I watched it, I was really confused. The second time I watched it, I was confused in a different way. But both were before I had my conversation with Steve. So I'm thinking if I watch it in light of what we discussed there, it might make a different kind of sense. Well, I'm glad you liked. I'm glad you liked The Prom.
Oh, it's great. It was really good.
Yeah. And I think that's a great idea for anyone who's out there who's I think the Criterion Collection version of the release of Secretary with the Prom in there would be I think it'd be a good thing. I mean, if Nicole Kidman will let us, she doesn't, because she's got her own new film, The Prom, that's kind of ruining any chances for my little indie student film with Jennifer Jason-Leigh and Steve Shainberg to ever see the light of day. You don't know what kind of dastardly tricks she gets up to maintain. Like, how does she maintain all this time? Killing the competition.
I really want people to see The Prom because, I mean, not just because it's good and you're good in it, but like Jennifer Jason-Leigh is my Nicole Kidman. Like, she's my favorite actress and has always been my favorite actress. And it's a shame that other people who love her like haven't seen this because she's great in it. She's amazing as always. And I think people should definitely check it out wherever they may find it. Wink, wink. To watch The Prom. Hi, I'm Brian.
And I'm AJ.
And we have a podcast called The Director's Wall,
examining a filmmaker's career, film by film. First up was M. Night Shyamalan, then Francis Ford Coppola. Who's next? Is there anything to this whole auteur theory? Find out on
The Director's Wall.
Subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or your preferred listening platform.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dennis Callow. I'm a photographer and a filmmaker out of Brooklyn, New York, and I'm here to tell you about my podcast, The Carrie Allen Picture Show. If you love films and you love filmmaking, then this is the show for you, because I talk to actors, actresses, writers, directors, comedians, anyone who's brave enough to go out and make a film. I talk to them. We talk about their experience making films, how movies shaped their lives, and made them want to go out and make their own. Tune in to The Carrie Allen Picture Show wherever you get your podcasts on Paper House Network. Seriously, it's everywhere. It's anywhere you go. Just there's a subscribe button. Go do the subscribe. Go hit the subscribe. Go ahead. I'll wait. Oh wait, I shouldn't make you wait because you're here to listen to the show, right?
You know, I don't really have a Radio 8 Ball connection to this, but I do want to revel for a moment in the synchronicity of the double proms. That in the month that we are exploring Nicole Kidman, her newest film is a film called The Prom, and I've had an imaginary portrait of Diane Arbus on my list of films that I've wanted to do since I provided my first list to you back in August.
True story.
July, June.
Yep. Yeah.
So this has been like, for me, the reason to do Kidmania was to talk about Fur, and not necessarily to talk about The Prom, but knowing that The Prom is part of my particular insight to it. And so we're getting ready to do this. And at the very moment when that happens, there's this other film called The Prom that makes discussing The Prom so confusing that your dogs are going crazy. There's a weird, these are the synchronicities that happen in my life. Back in the 90s, my band, The Previous, we put out a single called Corduroy the same week that a band called Pearl Jam put out a song called Corduroy. We'd been working on it for 2 years. They've probably been working on it for a month. It just happens, you know? It's not even a bad thing. It's like you're a Dudley Moore fan. You ever see the film Holy Moses?
Oh, yeah. Great movie.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like you're just right next door to the Moses story. It's kind of exciting to be right next door to the Moses story, but it's only exciting for you. Nobody else can see it. Except now, Brian, you're inside of the blast zone of my synchronicity, so you get to experience this. Has it been frustrating or confusing for you thinking about The Prom, Steven Shainberg's The Prom, and The Prom, the new hit musical from Nicole Kidman and Meryl Streep and James Corden?
Not at all. I can handle both at the same time.
Really? Can you imagine Pete popping in one and getting the other?
Yeah, it's like when that other Crash came out at the video store. A lot of people were renting the wrong Crash. But in my opinion, they were renting the better Crash. So it's like the one that won Best Picture, not as good as the people having sex with car crashes David Cronenberg won. And that's just, I think that's good. I think it's good to mix it up like that.
Any other films like where they have the same title and it's confused you?
I'm trying to think if there's any. There was, what was it?
I mean, I'm sure it happens all the time in porn. I mean, who could tell the difference between Big Butts 3 and Big Butts 4? Come on.
There's certain movies where I think I saw it because of the title, and I realized that I haven't seen it. I was thinking of another movie and I kept, like, there was the Paul Walker movie, Running Scared, and then there's the other Running Scared with, who was it? Gregory Hines and Billy Crystal, right?
Billy Crystal, yeah.
And so I thought I saw it, but I think I just recognized the title. And then when I watched the Paul Walker one, I was like, oh, wait, I've never seen this movie at all. Like, I just thought I did because of that similar title or something. I don't know. You know, like, and this happens to Zach and I all the time. Like, we're currently writing a thing that is called Prisoners, And then there was that movie from 2011 with Jake Gyllenhaal called Prisoners, but we thought of our title before we knew that movie existed, and our title is still the title we want. So it's sort of the thing of like, do we want to be another movie called Prisoners to confuse people? Or is people's attention span so short now that, you know, they won't even remember something from, 2 years ago. So it doesn't matter. And, like, why not name your movie Citizen Kane now? Because then it just means more people will watch it. Maybe I'll just name it Citizen Kane, and then more people will see it accidentally, and maybe they'll keep watching it. You never know.
So are you suggesting that it's possible that I should... I hear what you're saying. You're like some sort of Swami. You speak in riddles, but I think what you're saying is that rather than looking at the new Nicole Kidman, Meryl Streep, James Corden musical, The Prom, as a threat to my little indie student film with Steve Shainberg and Jennifer Jason-Leigh, I should see it as this sort of stealth marketing opportunity.
Yeah. Oh,
that
yeah.
It's actually helping, that having people talk about the prom, they're going to go look for the prom, and they're going to maybe find... Well, they might find this podcast because it'll be in the tags that,
Exactly.
we talk about the prom.
We're going to
be like, oh, I want to hear about the prom. And they're going to be so disappointed because they're going to think, Nicole Kidman, the prom. Oh, I love that movie.
Yeah, we're really shaking it up.
Oh, you know what? For those people, I just want to say Nicole Kidman's musical number is the sort of the most Fosse-esque musical number in it. And it's really great. I think it's called Zaz. Do it with Zaz. I don't know. Sounds dumb, but it's adorable. It's adorable. So now for the people who did that, they got there. And if you enjoyed that, if you enjoyed that moment of synchronicity, check out Radio 8 Ball. I had to, usually I let you promote it, but that was a weird turn and I needed to just handle that one myself. But let's talk about your other podcast, The Director's Wall, that you host with AJ Gonzalez, where you look at a filmmaker's filmography. And right now you're doing Coppola. Well, you're not right now. You're slacking on Coppola.
It's like he's such a good filmmaker that sometimes it takes a few months to ponder a movie of his. Like, I don't want to just jump into it. So we're taking our sweet time getting through a fairly small filmography that Francis Coppola has. But we're getting through it. It's happening. And AJ next month will be on the show with you talking about the Oscars, so that's very exciting.
Oh yeah,
so look for that, people. That's sort of like his wheelhouse. Like, he is the only person I know who loves and is excited about the Oscars is on the level that he is at, and great for him. So we can bring that to this show.
I think I'm going to make him feel comfortable. I'm going to go and grab some of your laugh recordings and drop them in under when he, like, there'll be a point when he says something and I'll drop it in and be like, oh, and I relax my old buddies here.
It can also work as nervous laughter if he's saying something inappropriate. You can just drop that in there to make it kind of cut the, break the ice.
Why would you set AJ up as someone who would say something inappropriate?
You never know. When people are in front of a microphone, it just happens sometimes.
He seems pretty low key and
he's not
chill.
Inappropriate ever.
Very well, a thoughtful, well-educated young man. If anyone's going to be inappropriate, it's me. That's my brand. And I mean, it's sort of, at this point, I got to ask, a Shainberg. I mean, we kind of did a little catch-all of it, but you could knock out a Shainberg season, the pace you do it like in a year. One every 2 months.
Gosh, I hope it would be less than a year for him. He hasn't made that many movies.
He's got 5 films. You could do them, like I said, would take you, okay, you could do it in 6 months. Anyway, would you ever consider with The Director's Wall, instead of taking on the biggies, just being like, hey, it does take us a while to do these. Let's do a bunch of people who are in that sort of Tim Robbins, Steve Shainberg. Like, how many films does Jane Campion have? She can't have that many films.
She has a bit. She's got like 15, I think.
15? Okay, so she's doing better or worse in terms of numbers, in terms of fitting into this particular box. I mean, Miranda July is working at it. Again, I know they're still young in their careers, but there is something about like, it's been fun doing this appreciation of Steve. And I'm thinking that there are probably a bunch of directors who are like that, who don't get to make films all the time, but made a run of really good ones, and they're still active. And by celebrating them, you might, light the fire. Is there anyone, whether it's Steve Shainberg, anyone else who you can think of who's like that, you might like to campaign for?
Yeah, there's a few. There's a director I really like called Andrew Rapaski McKellany, I think is how you say his name. And he's only directed like 4 features, but he is one of my favorite filmmakers, and nobody knows who the fuck he is. Nobody cares. And he's brilliant, and he is great. And I would love to do like a director's wall on him. The problem is with the internet and people is like, would they listen to a podcast that's about somebody they don't know? Like the nice thing about Coppola is that everybody has seen The Godfather, or with Shyamalan, everybody's seen a Shyamalan movie. So you can, easily, sign up to listen to an episode about a movie you haven't heard of by that person. But to pick a person that nobody knows, sadly, it means less people listening to it, less people excited about it. Though they should be.
Yeah, no, I'm guilty of it myself. Like,
would you be excited about an Andrew Rapaski McKellany podcast? No, you don't know who he is. You wouldn't do it.
I mean, I would, because I am a loyal friend and I support my friends and I trust your taste. But I am. Not everyone's like me.
This is true. Yeah.
In that regard. Plus, I love film. I know I try, but yeah, I would not seek it out.
Yeah.
I mean,
you wouldn't know.
Now unless I was doing research for a podcast. Why haven't you suggested a Andrew Rapaski?
It's
film?
Coming up. I want to do his film A Chronicle of Corpses, which I'm like obsessed with. I love it a lot. And so I think that will definitely be something we do. Well, I think we'll get to that by the summertime is my guess. We're getting close. I feel it's going to happen. I'm going to drop it very soon when we're brainstorming future episodes.
Oh, and just because this is the week we're recording this, the week that our episode for 10 came out, I was re-listening to it. I needed to ask you, have you watched What's Up, Doc yet?
No.
No, I didn't think so. Okay. I gotta keep the pressure on, Brian. It
will someday.
It is.
You will be the first to know. You'll be the first to know. When I do, you'll get an excited or not excited text about my.
I'll get an excited text because it's great.
I haven't watched it yet. I know it's on my list. There's so many movies in this world. It's hard to watch everything you want to watch. I'm still watching stuff someone told me I should watch from 10 years ago. Because
I know, and I make you watch new films every time and all this stuff. But you're taking a couple of weeks off here. This is, we should prepare the audience. I'm very sorry to tell you this, but next week, Brian's not going to be with us. He's going to be working on other things. No, and Brian, you invited a great second to fill in for you, Zach Carlson. It's going to be fantastic to be talking with him. But I'm just saying, you have a little bit extra time on your hands. You know what? You're not doing me a favor. You're not doing Barbra Streisand. I'm doing you a favor.
All you have to do is just tell me that there's an Emmanuel reference in What's Up, Doc, and I'll be watching it tonight.
Oh, yeah. You got to be working on Emmanuel.
Yep.
Emmanuel. It's like the Trading Places.
Yeah.
Let's wrap up this show. For folks who enjoy The World Is Wrong, you can find us at www.theworldiswrongpodcast.com. And every episode of this show has a page dedicated to it there. And sometimes there are links to the films that we talk about, particularly if they are hard to find. And sometimes those videos have a password. And if you just look somewhere on that page, around that where the video is, you might even find the password. Then you could just type it right on in there and watch that film. And I would always recommend checking out the webpage just on the off chance that that's there. But we couldn't tell you if it was, but it might be. And you can find our Instagram posts at The World Is Wrong Podcast. Brian handles most of those. And what else? What are we doing next? I'm going to be talking about Birth with Zach Carlson. So I recommend, if you're going to check out that episode, to watch Birth. We're also going to be talking about Sexy Beast and Under the Skin, because those are the other two films by Jonathan Glazer. He's another one who hasn't done that many, but they're all great.
But he's the best. He's great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Brian, good luck with your writing. We'll see you back in a couple weeks, and we'll be looking forward to that. Any last words to our listeners, who are going to be missing you?
No, it's okay, friends. I'll be back to love movies that you hate.
You can even wherever he is, just know that Brian is out there loving movies you hate, and sending me info about them on email so that I can check them out and learn to love them myself. Well, and I don't know where you are or what you're doing, but I am pretty sure that wherever you are out there, the world is wrong, and it's probably wrong about you.
You are such a bad girl.
What is this?
Oh, that's my tit, darling.
Oh.
Let me show you. You like him? Lionel's just the greatest, isn't he?
Yeah.
Every day for breakfast there's a dish of scrambled stars. And for luncheon you'll be munching rainbow candy bars. You'll be living a la mode on Jupiter or Mars. On a dreamer's holiday. Sing it. Make it a long vacation. Time there is plenty of. You need no reservation. Just bring along the one you love.
Take me.
No, it's true. I wrote it up. She's scared.
If you don't mind me asking, why did you drop the key down?
You looked like you needed to come up to my place.